In this book, Richard Sennet explores the concept of cooperation through a study of how humans act as social animals and the different ways cooperation have been carried out through history. And the final objective is to find a way to strengthen the weaknesses of cooperation in today's society. There are some keywords that are going to be repeated all along this presentation, and these are cooperation, competition, balance, genetics, survival, and exchange. The concept that is mainly repeated is that as social animals, we have to work for making a balance between cooperation and competition. These chapters explore the different possibilities of making this balance. On the one hand, we will have this vision of human's state of nature that, as Hobbes said, we're all in a war of each against all. The main question in these chapters is how are we supposed to prevail if we don't collaborate? How do we find a way to collaborate between each other if technically we are a wolf to another person? All social animals collaborate because the lone bee cannot ensure its own survival. We are individually insufficient creatures that need to divide our labor into small separate tasks. Even though there is an important variant that we have to take into account on the search of equilibrium, that are the environmental changes. Evolution happens because of these changes. They frequently run ahead of pattern behavior, forcing us to evolve as social animals. Contrary to what Lamarck thought, adaptation takes time, so some species will disappear and others will evolve. To understand this, there is a theory called the Gaia theory that says that we should think of Earth as a self-regulating mechanism in which only the species with higher adaptability are the ones that will remain. As you can see by now, this is always about finding the balance between cooperation and competition. So to understand where this balance is placed, we're going to study a little bit another concept, that is the concept of exchange. We define exchange as the give and take among all animals. So to clarify, we're going to divide the spectrum of exchange into 5 different segments. So these segments will be as altruistic exchange, win-win, differentiating exchange, zero-sum, and winner takes all. Now I'm going to get a little bit into explaining these different types of exchange, so finally we can understand the answer of the question of where the balance is. Let's start with the altruistic exchange. This exchange entails self-sacrifice, and for example in our life we can see it in helping out other workers even though their bosses offer not praise or recognition in return. On the other hand, we have the win-win exchange that is of course more reciprocal. There's this word in biology that is called symbiosis to define relationships between organisms of different species that help each other to obtain something in return. But in humans, culture holds a powerful sway over the practice of this kind of exchange, and we have a very common example in which modern coalitions during elections compete between each other. Then, when once in power, they share a slice of the political pie. This could be a clear example of how competition and cooperation is not something that balance naturally, that it takes will and effort. So the good negotiator has to learn how to deflect confrontation when things are getting so hot that one of the participants threatens to drop out, and has to develop some kind of sensitivity to others. There can also be a less formal form of cooperation that, for example, could be seen in bars after working hours, or negotiations that are made in the office around the water cooler. I'm going to move to other kind of exchange, that is the differentiating exchange, that is placed in the very middle of the spectrum. In this kind of exchange, partners become aware of their differences. In animal environments, for example, it is shown with the establishment of territories or defining borders. The idea of this exchange is to minimize the aggressive competition of territory. But as we said before, we have to also take into account the environmental changes. So there are these kind of inanimate forces like climate change, for example, that force communities to readjust their internalities. For example, penguins and gulls altering the ways they share space because of the rise of water temperatures. But for example, we can also see it in a more personal way, like two strangers meet in a bar, talk casually, and come away from the encounter with sharper personal understanding of their own interests. This one could appear as a win-win exchange, but it's more focused about what people learn about themselves than to what sustains a relationship. These encounters are kind of special because they celebrate the difference between members of a community, which affirm the distinctive value of each person. We put a comma and we start with the zero-sum exchange. That happens when one individual's or group's gain becomes another loss. We have seen this in childhood, in sport games, or in adult life with hirings and promotions, or also in wars. Even though it's not that radical because it entails a certain kind of cooperation between opponents. For example, in a context in which roles are set before the start. Such competitions must leave the loser something so that they can try again and are willing to continue competing. The lie here denies that the winner often takes pleasure in the other's fate but tries to deny it. The conclusion here is that zero-sum exchange is not quite Hobbes' state of nature, in which we are in a war of each against all, because this honor is reserved for winner-takes-all exchange. This kind of exchange is more like we meet, we compete, I take everything, and you're destroyed. In nature, the predator is the master of this encounter, while in human societies, it will be more like total war and genocide. Sennet clarified that this kind of exchange should be put to an end as soon as possible. With all this said, now we can answer the question of how then are the balance between cooperation and competition struck. The answer, of course, lies in the middle of the spectrum of exchange. It is clear that in a world ruled by Hobbes' state of nature, the survival and evolution of species will not be possible. And the author behind all this scientific explanation tries to make a call for us all to try and embrace difference of tribe, religion, and class. It is a fact that cooperation is inbred in our genes, but even though we need to make some effort to find out our own balance with the competitive part that is also inside of us.